guys, what's going on? We are talking Tampa Bay Buccaneers team preview, going over all 32 teams and talking every fantasy relevant player for the upcoming 2024 fantasy football season. Make sure you guys drop a sub, hit the like button for me. But this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team had a lot of fantasy friendly options last year. We got some surprises out of this group, especially if you invested heavily in this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team. You saw some wins. And so there's going to be some changes, some slight changes, but for the most part, outside of the young players, the personnel is going to stay the same. The offensive coordinator has now changed. Liam Cohen came over from Kentucky and has made a new emphasis on players over plays. So this is a good thing for your big name players that you've had in this offense before. He's from the Sean McVay tree. So should be a fun year for Tampa Bay Buccaneers players. It was a good season last year for him too, but even this year, I think we can have a little bit of value when it comes to these players and finding some potential upside. So let's start the quarterback position. Obviously last year, we got Baker Mayfield for free in drafts last year. I don't expect that to be the case this season, but he finishes the QB 10, threw for 4,044 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. So over the offseason, he signed a 3-year extension, which means that this team obviously believes that they found their quarterback for at least the next few seasons, right? Coming off of a career season, this is what you want to see. The team invest in their player. And even though there's a new offensive coordinator change, I still think it should still be a similar story with Baker Mayfield this season. Will he be QB 10? I think that might be a little bit of a reach. But can he be a top 15 option that we get outside of the top 15? Absolutely. Like, there's going to be some value with Baker Mayfield, who obviously had a connection with Mike Evans, with Rachaad White checking down to him. So for me, Baker Mayfield, who proved he belonged as a starting quarterback, should do well in this offense and with the team. Obviously, this coach as well was part of the regime when he was there in LA and had some really good games there for the Rams late down the 2021 season. So for me, actually it was 22-2 season, sorry. But for me, I still think Baker Mayfield has some value, especially in your super flex leagues. This is a quarterback you can get extremely late. One of the back end, QB options is going to be in the back half of the QB2s. High ends of the QB3s would be my guess is where it shakes out. Doesn't provide 5,000-yard upside or any rushing, but should provide some sneaky fantasy value for all those that draft them, all right? Next up, let's talk running back. And this is where, kind of gets interesting here. The former third-round pick Rachaad White came and took over Leonard Fournette's spot last season. He finishes the RB4. RB4. Listen, in PPR leagues, that's crazy. For where we were getting Rachaad White, and I was a big Rachaad White proponent last year, we got a lot of good value on him. 990 yards, just short of 1,000, 6 touchdowns, 64 catches, 549 receiving yards, and then 3 touchdowns in the air. I mean, dude, he balled last season for fantasy teams, and a lot of it was, working our way through the season. It wasn't early. He kind of struggled early on and then found his way as the season went on. So a lot of his value is tied to the receptions, the 64 catches, getting a lot of the receiving work. And then last year, all of the backs that they had last year, the Chase Edmonds, the Sean Tuckers, nobody was able to play that complementary role that we expected somebody to play in the Tampa Bay offense. It was literally Rachaad White, and that was it. So I think this year, he's probably going to be consistent because of the receiving work. But my gut says that this team gets another back involved. I'll talk about him in a second. He only had 3.6 yards per carry last year. And when you're not very effective and efficient with your touches, no matter how good or bad your offensive line is, teams are going to start looking to see if they can have other options. So I know no running back for this Tampa Bay team was good outside of Rachaad White. It's going to be the Rachaad White show unless we see a little bit out of their rookie that they just drafted in the 4th round this year, okay? So Rachaad White should still be a phenomenal value here. It just comes with a little bit more risk. You have to take him earlier now. You take Rachaad White in the back-end RB1, high-end RB2 conversation. But if he can maintain the starting role throughout the year, I still expect him to be a top 12 asset in fantasy when it comes to the running back position, okay? So Rachaad White is one of those players where, yes, we know what we're getting now. Now we can take him comfortably. It's just the risk factor is a lot higher than it was last year when you got him as RB22 or RB25, wherever you drafted Rachaad White last season, okay? But they did draft Bucky Irving in the 4th round, who's, decent sized back, 5'10", 195, had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons at Oregon, and we know he can catch the ball out of the backfield. So A lot of people were excited about Sean Tucker in a similar role last year, expecting him to take over some of the reps. Bucky Irving will have a chance to do that, and the team obviously thought high enough of him to draft him in the 4th round and give him and say he has a clear opportunity to assume part of the workload here. And my gut is that catching some of those passes out of the backfield is going to be something that Rachaad White seeds a little bit, right? He's gonna have to give up some of those receptions that he had out of the backfield. I think Bucky Irving is a step away or an injury away from having a real impact fantasy-wise, but he's definitely a name to monitor and a name to remember during your drafts. I'm not saying we draft him in redraft, but in Dynasty, all it takes is one slip-up for Rachaad White or a couple pop plays for Bucky Irving to show that he belongs, and now we have a new RB1 or potentially a handcuff scenario in this backfield, right? So the last thing you want to see out of this for Rachaad White is a split backfield. The best thing you want to see for Bucky Irving is an opportunity for him to prove that he belongs on the field on a regular basis, okay? Let's go to the receiving game. And the receivers, we know who the 2 receivers are on this team. We'll start with Mike Evans, who was the wide receiver 7 last year. Every year, they expect him to fall off for be a wide receiver 2, and we get top 10 to 12 seasons every single year for Mike Evans. It's crazy, and, we'll see where his ADP shakes out. People get tired of the name Mike Evans, and we know he gets 1,000 yards. But dude had 1,255 yards last year, 13 touchdowns. He had almost 80 catches. Like, it's not like he's a one-trick pony with the yards. He does it all. So he's only had one season in his whole career where he hasn't been a top 17 wide receiver. So no matter where you draft him, he's probably going to be somewhere of a value or where you drafted him. Like, you get really good value on Mike Evans, and just because he's 31 doesn't mean that now, we got to throw Mike Evans away. Now he's going to start to fall off. He's still producing at an elite level as evidenced by last season's numbers. So I think we can expect another top 15 season out of Mike Evans, and the crazy part is you're getting him around that value anyway. So Mike Evans, man, he's a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2's draft spot. He's been there for the last, I don't know how many years. A lot of times people, initially hate on him because he was inconsistent, or they said he was too touchdown dependent. And it's like, dude's had 1,000 yards every year. He's a big time receiver that makes big plays. I don't know what the hate is for Mike Evans. I'll never understand it. He will be a value again in this year's draft. Another wide receiver with promise this season, Chris Godwin. Obviously had a decent year last year. He was wide receiver 29 on the year, which, for Chris Godwin, we've seen him be like a top 2, top 3 wide receiver at times, playing out the slot. It was 2019, 2020. But I think this year, one of the things that the coaching staff has emphasized is that they want to get Chris Godwin back in the slot a little bit more. And that's where he had a lot of his success fantasy-wise. We were taking this guy as a top 15 receiver, and I know the situation was different, but Baker proved that he can carry, 2 really good receivers. Chris Godwin last year had 83 catches, 1,024 yards, only 2 touchdowns, right? So if Chris Godwin had 6 to 7 touchdowns, now we're talking about a whole different player. And if we can get those receptions closer to 90 to 95, I think Chris Godwin could be in for a sneaky year. So I really like the value with Chris Godwin. I think he's a safe player, right? He normally maxes out somewhere around 5 touchdowns. If we get similar yardage, 1,100 yards, 85 catches, 5 touchdowns, I think that's going to be a back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. So we can find value with Chris Godwin this year. The ceiling might be a little bit limited because Baker's the quarterback, because Mike Evans is there, because Rachaad White's so active out of the backfield. But Chris Godwin's going to have a role and be probably a very safe asset. In your PPR leagues, don't be scared to draft these 2 together, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. A lot of times you'll get into a spot where you draft Mike Evans early because he's a value, and then Chris Godwin's available later. They tend to offset each other. Sometimes they both have good games. So I wouldn't be scared to draft either one of these receivers, let alone both of them, because of the value. And then the team also took a receiver in the 3rd round, JALEN McMillian out of Washington, 6'1", 192, good speed. He was a wide receiver there with Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk, and then he got hurt, right? So he runs a 4.47, has a good vertical, 37-inch vertical. And on this team, he should assume the wide receiver 3 role over Trey Palmer. It wouldn't shock me if he even started the year like that. A lot of positive things being said about JALEN McMillian coming out. They're saying, he could have been a 1st-round pick had he not got hurt. So I think this is a good landing spot for him. Gives Baker Mayfield another weapon. I think in Dynasty, this is a player I'd be looking to target in your 2nd rounds or maybe acquire in a trade. before he takes off. So I think he'll be a good player for this team, maybe inconsistent in his rookie year, which is fine. I don't know if he'll be redraft worthy, but it's a player in Dynasty I'll be looking to acquire, or if you haven't had your drafts yet, this is a player I'll be looking to draft in maybe the back end, second round, early third, depending on your league size, obviously. That's for 12-team PPR leagues. That's how I'd say it. And then that tight end, we know we have with CADE. He's tight end 20 last year. He's not really a threat to like take off or do anything crazy. He only had 2 double-digit games last year. I think you can find a lot more value and probably better upside than CADE. 455 yards, 4 touchdowns, 47. He's just mid at the tight end position. And I know there's been games where you're like, oh, CADE, maybe he's an option. Even with new offensive coordinator here, I'm not assuming CADE takes any major leap, but my gut is that they probably end up getting a new tight end here in the next year or two anyway. He's decent. I think he's good for real football purposes, can move the change, can receive, right? But for fantasy purposes, he's not a big part of the offense. Probably the 4th option at best in this offense. So that does it for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Let me know if I missed any players that you wanted to hear about. Until then, I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.